I smiled while my father destroyed me in front of 200 people. Not because it didn't hurt. It hurt because it wasn't new. But this time, I finally understood something very important. People who think they've already won never see the ending coming. That smile on my face, it wasn't weakness, it was relief. Because in that exact moment, I stopped trying to earn a place I was never meant to have. My name is Claire Morgan. I'm 32 years old. And 3 weeks ago, at my father's retirement gala, I quietly erased my last name from my future. Let me take you back there. The ballroom at Riverside Country Club looked like something out of a corporate fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers hung low, casting warm gold over polished marble floors. Every table dressed in white linen, every chair perfectly aligned, like the room itself understood this night mattered. Outside, valet lines stretched down the driveway. Black Escalades, German sedans, cars that whispered money instead of screaming it. Inside, men in tailored suits laughed too loudly about deals they barely remembered making. Women drifted past in dresses worth more than my first apartment's rent. Everyone held champagne, not because they wanted it, but because it looked right. This wasn't just a party, it was a performance, and my father was the star of the show. Thomas Morgan, 40 years as CEO of a regional freight company that grew rich quietly, steadily. 40 years of shaking the right hands, laughing at the right jokes, and never letting anyone see what he was really like at home. The silence, the criticism, the love that came with conditions. He stood on stage with a microphone, bathed in applause. That applause fed him. You could see it. His shoulders straightened, his smile widened. This was his victory lap. And then he started introducing his family. First, his wife, Elaine. Polite applause. She smiled the way women do when they've learned survival looks like staying agreeable. Then his stepson, Evan, the heir, the successor, the boy who could do no wrong because he wasn't born with my last name. Standing ovation. And then, me. And this, my father said, tilting his head just enough to sound charming, is my daughter, Claire. I felt every eye in the room land on me. Not curious eyes, judging ones. The kind that scan your clothes, your posture, your worth. He paused. And in that pause, I already knew. No degree, he said. A ripple of laughter. No real career, he said. More laughter. Still freeloading off the family, he said. That one hit harder. 200 people laughed. Not awkward laughter, not uncomfortable shifting. Real laughter. The kind that settles into your chest and refuses to leave. I stood there. Perfect posture, perfect smile. The same survival mask I'd been wearing since I was 20. Inside, something clicked. Not broke, clicked. I lifted my champagne glass, slowly, deliberately. Cheers, I said. My voice didn't shake, because this is the last time any of you will ever see me. The room froze. Silence fell so heavy you could hear ice cracking in glasses. I placed the glass down, turned, and walked out. No rush, no drama, just my heels clicking against hardwood floors, while 200 people realized they'd just watched a man lose control of the one thing he thought he owned. Outside, the night air hit different. Cool, clean, honest. And for the first time in years, I wasn't shrinking. I was done explaining myself. If you've ever been the family joke, the disappointment, the one they love only when you're useful, stay with me. Because what happened after I walked out didn't just change my life. It exposed everything they worked so hard to hide. But to understand that, You need to go back 12 years to the day they made me invisible and the future they quietly stole while smiling to my face. Because what they took from me wasn't just money, it was my voice. It was my chance to be seen. 12 years ago, I became invisible, not because people stopped noticing me, but because the people who mattered most decided I didn't matter at all. I was 10 years old, a child with big dreams, who believed her parents would always be her shield. Instead, I learned how to disappear. I learned how to speak softly, so I wouldn't draw attention. I learned how to smile, so they wouldn't notice my sadness. At school, I was quiet, invisible in the hallways, invisible at lunch. Even teachers looked past me sometimes. Home was no different. If you could survive silence, I could survive anything. My father had his rules. The rules weren't fair. The rules weren't meant to protect me. They were meant to shape me into someone I would never want to become. My mother, she smiled, always smiling, but never speaking up. Her love was conditional. Do well and you're praised. Fail and you're ignored. I became skilled at hiding mistakes. I became skilled at hiding myself. By 15, I was an expert. I could blend into any room. I could answer questions without attracting attention. I could be at home without anyone noticing I existed. But hiding doesn't heal. It builds walls. Walls around your heart. Walls around your voice. Walls around the person you truly are. And those walls, they kept me safe, but they also kept me trapped. By 18, I left home. College was my first taste of freedom. But freedom wasn't easy. I had no guidance. No one had ever taught me how to trust. I learned through mistakes, painful, messy mistakes. Jobs came and went. Friendships faded. Love was complicated. Because I was invisible, and everyone else thought I still was. By 25, I understood something crucial. No one will fight for your life if you don't fight for it yourself. I started writing, at first quietly, then louder. Stories about people who hide, stories about invisible children, stories about breaking free. Each word was a brick taken from the walls I had built. By 30, I had a life. Not the life my family wanted for me, but mine. I moved to a city where no one knew me. I made friends who saw me, not the mask I wore. I found work I loved. And slowly, I learned to speak again, to stand, to demand a seat at the table. Then came the night of the retirement gala, the night where all those invisible years collided with the man who tried to keep me small. And that's when I smiled, not out of weakness, not out of fear, but because I finally knew I was free. And that's when the real story begins. Freedom tasted strange, sweet, and terrifying. I had never been on my own before. Not really. Every decision I made before had been shadowed by my father's judgment. Now, I was the only one I had to answer to. But freedom isn't just about escaping, it's about surviving what comes next. And that night, I learned that lesson the hard way. I was at a small cafe, my laptop open, typing the first real story I had sold. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Then my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I answered. Claire Morgan. Yes. This is Thomas Morgan, my daughter. And just like that, the past came crashing in. He had found me. Not by chance, on purpose. He wanted me to know he could still reach me. Every word he spoke felt like a threat wrapped in fake concern. You think you can live outside this family without consequences. I hung up. My hands shook. But for the first time, I felt something else. Determination. He had underestimated me, like he always had. The next day, I made a plan. Not to retaliate, not to fight back with words, but to protect myself. I changed passwords. I locked doors. I made my home a fortress. Then I began documenting everything. Every call, every email, every threat masked as advice. I realized this wasn't just about money or inheritance or even family pride. This was control, and control was his weapon. But weapons can be turned. I started small, small victories, paying off debts my father assumed I couldn't, getting clients he never thought I could reach, building proof that I could survive without him. By the third month, something changed. He called again. This time, he sounded surprised. He didn't expect this, he said. I smiled. Not out loud, but inside. For the first time, he had underestimated me. The first strike was his. The counter-strike was mine. And I realized this is what growing up invisible teaches you. Not how to hide, not how to shrink, but how to fight when no one expects it. Because being invisible means people never see you coming until it's too late. I never knew how quiet victory could feel. Not loud, not celebrated, just mine. The weeks after the first strike were a lesson in patience, in understanding that revenge isn't loud. It's subtle, it's quiet, it's inevitable. I built my life like a house of cards, careful, methodical. One misstep, one wrong call, and it could all collapse. But I was learning to trust my instincts, learning to see people clearly, not the image they wanted me to believe. I started taking small risks. I met new clients, I pitched bold ideas, and for the first time, I felt seen for what I could do, not who I was related to. Then came the call. My father. "I've been hearing things," he said, "about you." I smiled. Not out loud. Not yet. This time, I didn't feel fear. I felt ready. "You might want to reconsider your assumptions," I said. A silence. Then, "Claire, you've changed." "Yes," I replied, "and so have you. Limited yourself." From that moment, I realized something crucial. Power isn't given, it's taken, and I was ready to take mine. I started making bold moves, negotiating contracts he said I couldn't, building alliances he didn't notice, opening doors I was told would remain closed. Every success was quiet, but it echoed louder than any applause. And then the moment came. A family gala. The same ballroom, the same crystal chandeliers. But this time, I walked in as a storm. Not timid, not afraid. All eyes turned, and for the first time, I could feel them notice me. Really notice me. I didn't wait for introductions. I didn't apologize for existing. I owned the room. And in that ownership, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace, freedom, power. I had taken the life I was denied, not from him, from me. And the world had to notice, or it wouldn't matter. Because Claire Morgan wasn't invisible anymore. Not to family, not to business, not to herself. I had risen from the shadows. I never imagined it would come to this. The calm before the storm was louder than any shouting. Months of planning, months of watching, learning their habits, their weaknesses, and finally the moment arrived. I stood outside the office doors, the ones that had once kept me out. I hesitated, just for a second. Then I remembered I wasn't the scared girl hiding in the shadows anymore. I opened the door and walked in like I owned every inch of that space. Eyes turned. Whispers floated. "Is that—" "Yes," I said. "I am Claire Morgan, and I'm here to finish what I started." The boardroom went silent. Not a cough, not a shuffle. Silence so thick you could slice it. I laid the files on the table. Evidence, decisions, truths they'd hidden for years. And I spoke, every word deliberate, every sentence cutting through lies. I reminded them how easily the world could see the cracks they tried to hide. They looked at me, confused, angry, afraid, and I smiled. Not malicious, not bitter, but because I finally understood. This power wasn't about revenge. It was about claiming my life. They tried to interrupt. I silenced them, one by one. Their objections faded, like whispers drowned by a rising storm. By the time I finished, the room had changed, not physically, but in power. I held it, every second, every heartbeat, every breath. And then I looked at him, my father, the man who tried to define me for 40 years, and I saw something I never thought I would. Respect, acknowledgement, fear even. Not for me, for himself. I left the room, not like a defeated child, not like a desperate woman, but like a queen who had finally reclaimed her crown. The world would remember this moment. I would, because the girl who once hid was gone, and in her place stood Claire Morgan. The city looked different now, not because it changed, but because I did. Every street corner, every cafe, every neon light reminded me of choices I had never allowed myself to make before. Freedom tastes like a slow exhale, and I was finally breathing. The days after the boardroom were strange. Not angry, not sad, but full of potential. I spent hours walking through the city, watching life unfold around me, and realizing I no longer needed anyone's permission. Emails from my father came, short, careful, but underneath, I could see it. Respect, even fear, and I smiled. Because it wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. I rented a small office downtown. Just one floor, nothing extravagant, but it was mine. I filled it with plants, with sunlight, with the sound of my favorite music. And for the first time, work felt like not survival, but creation. The people I hired weren't perfect. They didn't have the right pedigree, but they had heart, and that mattered more than any last name ever could. I called my mother one evening. She hesitated. Then she asked, "Are you happy?" I thought about all the nights I cried in my old apartment, all the meals I skipped to save pennies, all the judgment I endured. And I said, yes, I finally am. The horizon stretched ahead, full of uncertainty, full of risk, but also full of possibility. I learned something essential. Life doesn't wait for anyone. It doesn't care about mistakes, or who doubted you, or how many times you fell. It only rewards those who step forward. And I stepped. Every day. Not perfectly, not without fear, but with purpose. Because I understood now, the only life worth living is the one you claim for yourself. The city lights blurred behind me as I walked home. I wasn't Claire Morgan, the invisible daughter, anymore. I was Claire Morgan, the author of her own story. And this story, it was only beginning. Morning sunlight filtered through the blinds. Warm, soft, promising. I poured myself a coffee, sitting at my little desk, surrounded by sketches, plans, and dreams. No one told me what to do anymore. No one judged my every decision. I was free. And freedom is louder than any applause. The phone rang. It was a client, one I'd landed on my own. They didn't care about my last name. They cared about my vision. That felt revolutionary. Emails, calls, meetings. I handled them all. And with each success, I felt a piece of the old Claire, the one buried under expectations, fade away. By afternoon, I walked out onto the terrace. The city stretched before me. Tall buildings, busy streets, people rushing somewhere, living lives they hadn't questioned yet. And I realized something. I didn't want to rush. I wanted to choose my pace. That evening, I met with Maya, my closest friend, the one who'd never let me settle. She looked at me, her eyes sharp. "Claire," she said, "you've changed." I laughed. Yes, I admitted. I finally stopped being invisible. And for the first time, I saw her not just as a friend, but as a mirror, someone who'd fought her own battles and refused to bow. Together, we planned a new project, something ambitious, something only we could create. I felt the familiar rush, the kind that comes with uncertainty. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was excitement. That night, I walked home, the streets alive with stories. Every passerby, every honk, every flickering light whispered, "Life is happening, and you get to live it your way." In my apartment, I looked at the piano, the one Grandma left me. It wasn't just an instrument. It was a symbol of what I lost, of what I reclaimed. I sat down, fingers hovering over keys. I played, slowly, deliberately, each note a declaration. I am here. I am present. I am unstoppable. By the end of the night, the melody lingered in the room, a reminder that silence can be broken, that shadows can be left behind, and that the future, no matter how uncertain, was mine to shape. Because I had learned the most important lesson of all. Life doesn't define you. Your courage does. And tonight, I was more courageous than ever. The world awaited, and I was ready. Morning wasn't gentle. It was fierce. Sunlight poured through the window like it had something urgent to tell me. I opened my eyes and remembered everything. The betrayals, the loss, the freedom I'd fought for. And suddenly, I wasn't afraid anymore. I stood at the edge of my balcony, city alive below me. Every honk, every shout, every siren, it all felt like a challenge I was ready to accept. My phone buzzed, a message from a stranger. One line, "I've heard about you. Let's talk." No hesitation, no second guessing. I replied, "Tomorrow, 10 a.m., because life waits for no one." By noon, I was in my office, surrounded by sketches, designs, and contracts. This was mine, all mine. And yet, something stirred in me, a memory I couldn't shake. Grandma's piano, her voice echoing in my mind. Power, Claire, isn't taken, it's nurtured. I ran my fingers over the keys. The notes sounded different now, confident, unapologetic. And I realized the same courage that let me walk away from my father was the courage I needed to build my empire. By evening, the city lights glittered like promises. I walked through the streets, each step echoing determination. I stopped by a small cafe. A young woman was sketching furiously in a notebook. I smiled. She looked up. "I want to create something that matters," she said. Her words mirrored my own 12 years ago. I leaned down, handing her a notebook of my own designs. "Start here," I said. "Build your world." And in that moment, I understood. True success isn't measured in wealth or recognition. It's measured in the lives you touch. That night, I returned home. The apartment was quiet, but I wasn't alone. Every memory, every lesson, every heartbreak, they were all there, cheering me on. I sat at the piano and played, not for anyone, not for approval, but for myself. Each note a victory, each chord a declaration. I am Claire Morgan. I am free, and the world is mine to shape. The city slept, but I didn't. Not because I couldn't, because I wouldn't. I'd spent 32 years chasing approval, chasing a place that was never mine. And now, I was free to chase my own future. I pulled out the blueprints. Every line, every corner, every space I'd imagined in my mind, they were real now. The office wasn't just a room, it was a statement. Every glass wall, every minimalist desk, every light carefully placed, it screamed one thing: Claire Morgan owns this. I walked to my piano. It sat there like a crown, silent but commanding. I pressed a key. The note lingered, a reminder of where I'd been and where I was going. Then the phone rang, a familiar number. It was Evan. "Yes?" I said. There was hesitation on the line. I I wanted to say I'm sorry," he stammered. I let it hang. Then I smiled. "Evan, it's not about apologies anymore. It's about moving forward." And just like that, the past lost its power over me. Because I realized something critical. Your family doesn't define you. Your actions do. I picked up my notebook. Plans, partnerships, new ventures, everything I'd imagined over the years now had a path. Outside, the city lights danced on the river. They weren't just lights, they were possibilities. I called the young designer I'd met yesterday. "Come by," I said. "Let's create something that matters." And as I hung up, I realized the most important legacy isn't inherited. It's the one you build yourself. I sat at the piano and played. This time, every note was mine, every chord a promise. I will not falter. I will not wait for approval. I will lead. And when the last note lingered, I looked out the window. The city, the world, the future, all waiting for me. I am Claire Morgan. I am my own legacy. And this is only the beginning. The sun rose slowly over the skyline. Soft light spilled across the room. I didn't rush to see it. I let it come to me. For the first time in years, I wasn't running. I wasn't shrinking. I was fully here. The city hummed below, oblivious to the small victory in my apartment. Victory? Not quite. Freedom feels different. It doesn't roar, it whispers. I poured myself coffee, not out of habit, but as a quiet celebration. Every sip tasted like control regained. I glanced at the piano, silent, waiting. Every note I played yesterday echoed in my mind, a promise to myself to build, to create, to lead. The phone buzzed again. Another opportunity. I smiled, because for the first time, I chose which doors to open. No one else's expectations could push me back. No past betrayal could anchor me. I opened my notebook. Plans, sketches, ideas, all waiting to take shape. And then I looked outside again. The streets were alive. Strangers rushing, lives unfolding, stories colliding. I realized something. I had lived in other people's stories for too long. Now it was time to write my own. Not with fear, not with doubt, but with courage. I sat at the piano and played. Each note a sentence, each chord a paragraph. The music told my story better than words ever could. By noon, I had drafted the first plan for the new venture. Not a fantasy, not a half-hearted attempt. Real steps, real goals, real future. The world outside hadn't changed, but I had. And sometimes that's enough. Because the past, the betrayal, the family drama, they were just shadows. Shadows that could no longer touch me. I leaned back, eyes closed. Breathe in, breathe out. I was not just surviving anymore. I was alive. And that was everything. I stepped into the room and immediately the air felt heavier. Not heavy with dust or silence, but with expectation. Every eye turned toward me. Every whisper, every murmur felt like it was measuring me, weighing my worth. I tried to calm my racing heart. It wasn't working. The laughter from the last encounter still lingered, sharp and cruel. I remembered the tight knot in my chest, the way my hands had trembled ever so slightly as I raised that champagne glass. But this time, I didn't let fear take the lead. I drew in a slow breath, and I smiled. Not the fake one I'd perfected for years, but the one that carried fire, clarity, and resolve. Thomas Morgan, my father, sat at the head of the long oak table. His smile was polite, masking suspicion. "Claire," he said, voice smooth, almost too smooth. "Yes," I replied, keeping my tone steady, but inside I felt a storm. He leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. "You've changed," he said. I almost laughed. Almost. Not because it was funny, but because it was true. Years of being invisible, of being criticized for everything I was and wasn't, had led to this transformation. Not changed, I corrected him softly. Evolved. He blinked, as if that word carried some secret meaning he wasn't ready to understand. I moved closer to the table, letting my presence fill the space. Every movement deliberate, every step measured. The air around us seemed charged, electric. I could see the subtle shift in his posture, the tightening of his jaw. Finally, I reached the chair opposite him. I sat, crossed my legs, and put my hands on the table, steady, calm, unshakable. "You've spent years trying to control me," I said, voice soft but cutting like glass. He froze. "You thought keeping me small would keep me obedient, keeping me dependent." I watched him struggle to maintain composure. The man who commanded boardrooms, closed deals, and shook hands with politicians now sat across from me, uneasy. "I've learned something," I continued. "Being small doesn't make you safe. It makes you invisible." I could see a flicker of regret, or was it fear, pass through his eyes. I let the pause stretch, giving the weight of my words time to settle. Then I leaned forward, just slightly, letting the intensity of my gaze land squarely on him. "This time, you don't get to decide my story. I do." Silence filled the room. It wasn't polite, it wasn't forced. It was real, heavy. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Not the kind that comes from wealth or influence or control. The kind that comes from finally standing in your own truth. He opened his mouth to speak. I didn't let him. Instead, I rose slowly from the chair, every inch deliberate, every heartbeat echoing the words I didn't need to say. I walked to the door, pausing just long enough for him to see me leave, not defeated, not broken, but unshakable. Outside, the night air hit my face like a cleansing wave, cool, sharp, true. For the first time, I felt the future wasn't a cage, it was mine to shape. And that night, I finally understood the weight of freedom, the kind you only earn after surviving the very people who were supposed to protect you. And that was everything. The next morning, the world felt different. The sun poured through the blinds, warm and indifferent. Indifferent to everything that had happened last night. I sipped my coffee slowly, every sip grounding me, reminding me that I was still here, still alive, still free. My phone buzzed, a message from someone I hadn't expected to hear from. "Claire, we need to talk." No name, no number, just those words. My pulse quickened. I hesitated, then typed, "Who is this?" The reply came almost instantly. "Someone who knows everything. Someone who can help you take it back." The words hit me like a cold wave. Take it back? My inheritance? My life? And suddenly, all the anger I had buried, all the years of silent suffering, surged forward. It wasn't just about money. It was about justice. I remembered every slight, every insult, every cruel joke whispered in my presence, every moment my father tried to make me smaller, every time my stepbrother Evan smiled as if he deserved it all. And now it was my turn. I got dressed with precision, not for anyone else, not for revenge alone, but for myself, to reclaim what had always been mine. I arrived at the meeting place, a small cafe tucked in a quiet street, the kind of place no one noticed unless they were looking for it. Inside, a man waited, mid-40s, sharp suit, sharper eyes. He didn't stand. He just looked at me, and I felt like he could see through every lie, every mask I had ever worn. "Claire Morgan," he said, voice calm but authoritative. "That's me." "Good," he said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were documents, photographs, emails, evidence of years of deception, all the proof I needed to expose my father's lies. My hands trembled slightly as I flipped through them, not from fear, but from the weight of truth finally landing in my hands. He watched silently. "You understand what this means?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I understand everything now." And in that moment, something inside me shifted. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my story. I could almost feel the years of injustice, the weight of their control begin to lift. Freedom didn't come quietly. It came like a storm, and I was ready. That night, I returned home. Every step echoed with purpose. Every glance in the mirror reminded me I was no longer invisible. I was someone to be reckoned with. The first call I made was to Evan. "Evan," I said, voice steady, "it's time we talked. About everything." I could hear the hesitation on the other end, the same hesitation my father always had. But this time, I was holding the power. And that night, I realized that justice wasn't just a word. It was a storm I was ready to unleash. And that storm was just beginning. The morning was quiet. Too quiet. I sat at my desk, the folder still open, the evidence staring back at me. Every lie, every betrayal, every hidden truth finally laid bare. And for the first time in years, I felt powerful. Not because I had wealth, not because I had revenge, because I had clarity. I knew who I was and what I deserved. I walked into my father's office. The man who had once made me feel invisible now sat behind a mahogany desk, oblivious to the storm coming. "Claire," he said, feigning warmth, "good morning." I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile, one that held years of pain, of endurance, and finally, defiance. "I've been meaning to talk to you," he said, leaning back. "About what?" I asked, voice calm but sharp. He blinked. Something in his confident posture faltered. I, I don't understand," he muttered. "You will," I said, placing the folder on his desk. The photos, the emails, the contracts, every piece of deceit, every manipulation, every attempt to erase me. His eyes widened. "Claire, this isn't—" "Stop," I interrupted. "No excuses, no lies, no power plays." I watched as his empire of control crumbled silently in front of me. And then I called Evan. "Evan, it's time for the truth," I said. On the line, I heard the hesitation, the guilt, the recognition of every injustice. It was his first lesson in accountability. The confrontation lasted hours. I didn't yell. I didn't plead. I spoke with precision, clarity, authority. Every word a mirror reflecting their actions back at them. By the end, the room was silent. No laughter, no excuses, only truth. I closed the folder, walked out, and for the first time in my life, I felt weightless. Not free of them, free of the fear they had always instilled in me. Outside, the air was crisp, the city was alive, and I was finally awake. The storm had broken, not against them, but within me. I walked through the streets, head high, heart steady, every step a declaration. I am Claire Morgan. I am not invisible. I am not defined by their rules. I am my own story. And that was everything. For the first time, the world didn't scare me. I had survived, I had grown, and I had won. No applause, no audience, just me. And that was enough.